and he was very fallible. And he made some big whopping mistakes. And we know he was redeemed when he died, because he was washed in the blood and covered by the grace of Jesus. That's what gives us hope. And there's John Orr. Good to see you, John. So Peter was something, but you know, the things Peter writes about, he was an eyewitness. When he writes about Jesus Christ and his teachings, he was there. He heard them with his own ears. He saw the impact of those teachings upon the crowds and the multitudes with his own eyes. He was there. You know, he was there. Think about this. Peter was the first apostle that acknowledged Christ, that Jesus was the Christ. We find that in Matthew 16 and verse 16. You know that discussion. You know, well, whom do men say that I am? And Peter jumps right in and he says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus responds, blessed are you, Peter, Bar-Jonah, and upon this rock I will build my church. No, he didn't build a church upon Peter, as some would teach. It's built upon that good confession that Jesus, the Son of Man, was the Christ and also the Son of God. It's built upon that. Okay? So he was there. And he was present at, very likely, we don't know this for a fact, but it's likely he was present at Jesus' crucifixion, even though he had denied him by then. But there is a very broad statement that we read in the book of Luke, I believe it is, where Luke records that all of Jesus' followers, plus the women, were observing the crucifixion from a distance. Now, it's possible Philip was in that group, or not Philip, but Paul was in that group that observed from afar, or Peter. Man, I'm hitting everybody but Peter. Peter was in that group. But we do know for a fact Peter was present when Jesus stood before Pilate. Do you recall that? Mm-hmm. He was present. It was not one of his glorious moments. But he was there. He was in the outer court when the woman came up to him and says, I know you, you're a follower. And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. Remember that? He was still there when someone else came by, when he's by the fire, and said, I know you. You're a Galilean. You're one of his. He says, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he was there in the inner courtyard where everything was happening with Jesus before Pilate. And someone else accused him of being a follower of Jesus. And the scripture says he cussed. He shouted out, I am not. I don't know the man. And Luke records, when he said that, Jesus turned and looked at him. I think maybe Jesus turned and looked at him because he heard Peter deny him. Because Peter, as I understand from my reading of the scripture, he wasn't speaking softly at that point. And he remembered, Jesus told me when the cock crows and the cock is now crowing and he hears it resounding in his ears, you'll deny me 3 times. So Peter was there. A first-hand witness. That's pretty important. At one time in my life, when I was still a young man, just out of college, and off to conquer the world, I was a retail store manager for Tandy Leather Company. About 2 years. It was an interesting job. And I had made a friend in the Kansas City area named Doug Intricate. And we had volunteered extensively with Boy Scouts together, and he was a customer at my Tandy Leather store. Sometimes Doug and I had others, regulars, they'd just drop in 2 or 3 times a week and drink a cup of coffee. And we'd sit and talk. And I knew Doug had an involvement in World War II with the atomic payloads that were delivered on Japan. And it was not, as I've heard other people talk about, I was involved in that mission, and they were on a diversionary raid 300 or 400 miles away. No, Doug had some sort of intimate knowledge. And to this day, I still can't tell you. I don't know. I make some assumptions. But one day, Doug came into my shop extremely upset. He's very anti-nuclear, and there's nuclear protests going on in the area because a new nuclear plant is going in northeastern Kansas. And he's upset, and he's just faunching at the bit. And he says, "Dennis, those suits showed up again." I didn't know what he meant by suits. I figured it out pretty quick. Yeah, those young guys, they weren't even alive when I experienced these things. They have no clue, but they showed up again. Well, the suits were FBI, CIA, men in dark suits that would show up every once in a while when nuclear things got hot in the area, and they'd remind him, "You've taken a vow of silence. You can keep your mouth shut." So he had an intimate knowledge of what went on with that thing. I think maybe it was reconnaissance, but I don't know for sure. But he told me at that point, he said, "Dennis, we killed a schoolyard full of children. When that bomb detonated, the school was incinerated." And he said, "I know because I saw the photographs." That's all he said. That's pretty horrible, you know. Well, several years later, I'm watching the Ken Burns documentary called The War. Did any of you see that, about World War II? And they interviewed a survivor of the bomb blast at Hiroshima. And he was a child when that happened, and he said, "The reason I survived is I was sick. I was at home that day, but my sister went to school. She and all the other children died. The school was obliterated." So my friend knew what he was talking about, you know, because he had firsthand knowledge. You could take it to the bank. I've had some other experiences like that with people telling me something. One of the more interesting ones I had, I'll say this and then I'll move on. I was talking to a resident one day, we were talking about baseball. And he was telling me he had seen Babe Ruth play baseball. Of course, that got my interest. And we're talking about Babe Ruth, and he says, "Yeah, I was at that game. I saw it." Any baseball fans in here? Oh, well. Then I'll explain. He says, "I was at that game." I said, "What game was that?" "You know, that game where he pointed out there, and he sent that home run ball right where he pointed." I said, "You were at the game where he called the shot?" That's what the game is known as. He says, "Yep, I was there. I saw it." I said, "So what do you think? Was it deliberate?" Because that's the debate in the baseball world. Was it deliberate, or was it just a lucky hit? He says, "No, it was deliberate because he stood there and he definitely pointed right there at the center field spot where he put that ball over the fence." He says there was no accident about it. said, okay. So that was one of my more interesting firsthand experiences that I learned from one of my residents years ago. But Peter knew these things firsthand. He was there. He was there. So what he testifies about and what he says to us, we need to pay attention to. Because we're not getting it second hand, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand. We're getting it straight from Peter, who saw and heard and lived these things. It was important to the people who would read these letters in the first century, and is still just as important to us that are following behind studying his words today. It's prima facie evidenced. But let's look at what Peter has to say. In verse 1, he says he's writing to those who reside as aliens. They're aliens, and they're scattered through all these lands in what is now Turkey to us, if you look on the map, that they're aliens. Now, what does it mean to be an alien in a land? It means, little green men coming out of a space capsule? No, that's being very facetious, isn't it? What it means is that you're not living among your people. You're not with your people. Living here in Wichita Falls, I'm here at Faith Village, I'm with my people. Because we're family. And living out there, outside, I'm not among my people. You plant me in the middle of Ouachita County, Oklahoma, because I'm the son of a native son of Ouachita County, you'll find I'm different. I'll talk differently, And you'll see me in a group of people, we're all talking, and this confuses Maggie half to death. And it's like, what are you talking about? I don't understand a thing you're saying. That's because they're my people. And we have all these experiences together, not just in our lives, but through also generations of our parents and grandparents that trigger us. And we know what it's all about, although if you're listening, you wouldn't have a clue. They're my people. These are aliens in the land. They're not among the people. So they're not out there when they go out into the marketplace and they start talking among each other. What they're saying is something foreign to the people that they live among. They're praising and worshiping somebody called Christ. And they're not bowing a knee to Nero or any of the Roman gods. They won't bow a knee to any of the regional gods because they worship Christ and only Christ. They're not going to bow to anyone else. They're strangers in that land. The philosophy of the world at that time was there were multiple gods. You travel from place to place to place, and there was a different God in every place. And you came among different people. They had a different God for their nations, but not only that, within regions of the nations, those regions also had gods for those regions that you would worship. And then you get this group that comes along. There is one and only one God, and they won't bow their knee to any other. I'll never forget the day, Miss McBride's class, 5th grade, a new student is in class, and she introduces him, and she says, now when we stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance, he will stand with us, but he won't say the Pledge of Allegiance. He won't put his hand over his heart, and he will not repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. And she said that's because he and his family are Seventh-day Adventists, and in their belief, they believe there is only one God, and that their allegiance is only given to God, to no one else. And it says, now you may not believe that. You may think, you may not believe that yourself, but we will respect it in this classroom. And I hear about stuff going on in classrooms today, and I'm thinking, I guess teachers just don't know these things these days, so they bring it down on the students. But anyway, he didn't escape razzing from us. He did, but turned out to be a real good guy. We all got to know him, become friends with him. But they're different because they're not going to pledge allegiance. They've given their allegiance to God. They're not going to give it to anyone else. I was reading an article not long ago, things that are weakening Christian churches today. And one of the things that this writer brought out, and I don't know where they get their information or their statistics. I'm suspicious about anything I read anymore. But one of the things he says is the rise of nationalism in Christian churches. Meaning, all hail the red, white, and blue. Oh, and God too. That's weakening us. And if it's going on in places, I would see why that would be true. Okay, but they're different. They're aliens in that land. The question we need to ask ourselves: are we aliens in this land, or are we just like everybody else? I mean, we really need to, I think, self-examine ourselves. I do. When church is out today, are we going to run home real quick because the Cowboys are playing? Be honest with yourself. Be honest. Well, I know the answer to that because I know myself. I care nothing for the Cowboys, but if those Kansas City Chiefs are playing and it's a noon game, yeah. I'm looking at my watch. Chris, can't you wrap this up a little earlier? Let's be honest. Should that be our priority? We assemble together on the first of the week as a family of God to worship God primarily. And then secondly, what do families do when they are together? They support one another. They build each other up. Sometimes they may look at a brother and sister and saying, what you're saying, what you're doing, that ain't right. They help us correct when we need to be corrected. And I've been mighty thankful for some brothers in my life that had the intestinal fortitude that they would come to me and say, listen, Dennis, this has happened, and that ain't right. I didn't like hearing it, but I needed to because they were right. I needed to make some adjustments. And I'm glad that they came to me to let me know. When we get out of these pews and we hit these doors at 90-0, it's a discouragement. We discourage each other. We have no importance of staying with our family. We want to go out into that world where we're aliens and have no family. We're rushing out to do that. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Oh, by the way, just to let you know, I just turned 67. I tell people now, don't believe that because chronologically I'm 67, but I'm still a 17-year-old and I'm on the back of a flatbedded hay truck and I can buck bales all day long. 12, 14 hours. I may be tired, but I'll still be going strong. Believe that. I've got some land I'll sell you. But and as I have aged, I feel an urgency to encourage people to take action. That action being to follow this word and to live it every single minute of every single day of your life. Because I know all too well what's happening to me. I'm aging out. That's what we call it in this world. I'm aging out at the place I work. And if I don't retire, at some point, somebody's going to come in and say, "You're out of here." You know, if I don't come to my retirement first, that'll happen, and I'll be sent down the road. It happens in church by those people who have upheld this word throughout their lives. They go to their heavenly reward. That's the goal of what we do in this family of ours that is united under Christ Jesus and are His church. That's the goal, isn't it? Well, what happens when one of these dear saints, brothers or sisters, attains the goal? We got to have somebody step up or continue and get stronger at living this word in the presence of the world, so that the world sees Christ in them and in us. There's an urgency about that, folks. We should be concerned about that every morning when we wake up. It isn't, "Oh no, I got it, my fingers are hurting today, my arthritis is flaring up." I mean, the urgency is living today to show Christ to those in my workplace. Living today to show Christ to the people in the shopping market when I go there. Living today to show Christ to people at the gas pumps when I gas up. Living today to show Christ at the doctor's office when I go see my doctor. Living today when I go to watch one of my grandkids at a sporting event, so that I demonstrate Christ at that sporting event. And man, at those sporting events, can people get ugly? You know, why? I'm aging out. There's an urgency about this. I wish that at 35 I would have felt the same urgency about it that I feel now. Some of you may understand that. But this is what we need to live. We're aliens in this land. Okay? Let me look at my notes. Here's some other things to consider. I said he was the first to acknowledge that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. He was also the first apostle that at least we have a written record of that denied him. At least I couldn't find any other apostle that had denied him before Peter. So he not only was he the first to acknowledge him as the Christ, he was the first to deny him. And did you follow the wording when he denied Christ? His acknowledgement was what? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's quite a powerful statement. But when he denied him, there when Jesus stood before Pilate, what terminology did he use? I don't know the man. I don't know the man. I don't know what you're talking about. So Jesus went from being the Christ to a man. Let's hope if that ever happens in our lives, when Jesus stops being the Christ and is just a man to us, we can recover from that like Peter did. That's the great example and hope Peter brings to all of us, is it not? So he was the first to deny him. As I said, he was a witness of Christ. And he saw the empty tomb. Do you recall that? The women went first with all their spices and things that were used to anoint the dead. The stone was rolled away, and they discovered the grave was empty. And they ran back to tell the apostles and those that were with them. And when the apostles received the word, Peter and another follower, which we commonly believe was John, although we don't know for 100% fact, ran to the tomb. The other apostle beat Peter there and stooped and looked in, and he saw the wrappings that had been wrapped around the body lying there. But then the scripture records when Peter got there, he went in the tomb, just like some of the women had done before him. And there he observed the grave wrappings and the face cloth lying there. He had a first-hand experience, first-hand knowledge of what was in that empty grave and why was it important. I don't understand all the ins and outs. As I understand, it's important the way the languages record how those grave wrappings and the face cloth are laid out in the grave. That in itself is a prima facie evidence that, the body miraculously came back to life. But Peter saw that himself. And then he went back to report what he saw to the others. So he went in the empty tomb, and he saw there was no body, but she did see the other things that were there. And he also witnessed the resurrection, as I mentioned earlier. He was, or the crucifixion, I'm sorry. So we're strangers, we're aliens in this land. This is not our permanent place. We're not going to be here forever. We have a home that we're going to. Hebrews 12, verse 1 and 2, I really, one of my favorite scriptures. It has been for years. The author there says, "Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith." So as a result of what Peter saw and Peter experienced, he is giving us these things so that we might have this great hope, and we have to fix our eyes upon Jesus. And it was through his death, his burial, and his resurrection that he brought about this faith, assures our faith, anchors our faith that we have among ourselves today. He fixed it upon us. Fixed meaning that we, as I understand it, we turn our eyes away from other things and we focus singly on one thing. We focus singly on one thing. Several years ago, I may have told this before. I tend to repeat things, so if you've heard it before, if you tell me we've heard it before, I'll stop. Okay? I don't want to bore you. But several years ago, my family and I had a private tour of the U.S. Air Force Academy. An officer there who was there at the time, he took us through the academy, through all the venues, the athletic facilities. We went down into a series of tunnels that kind of connect a lot of these buildings. It was winter time. There was a lot of snow on the ground. But we didn't trudge through the snow to go building to building. We went through tunnels and went through the buildings. Saw the chapel. The chapel's really nice there. In the back of the chapel, in case you haven't been there, there's a synagogue. So they have for the Jewish faith as well as Christian faith. May have more now, I don't know. But we went into the gift shop, I don't know what they call it, but you could buy gifts there. And on the wall were year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. The mission of year 1 cadets is to learn the mission of the Air Wing of the United States Air Force Academy, to follow the leaders of the senior cadets, to follow the leadership, the instructions of the senior cadets, and down there at the last, it was to develop good fellowship principles. Year 2, to adhere to the mission of the Cadet Air Wing. 1, to exhibit leadership principles over the undergraduates, so that they might follow the mission of the Cadet Air Wing. Number 3, whatever it is. The last one is continue to develop good fellowship principles. Here, number 4. Continue in the leadership of the Cadet Air Wing. Increase your leadership skills, whatever. Number 4, number 2, whatever. Last one, continue to develop good fellowship skills. Year 4, senior cadets. Senior cadets will lead the mission of the United States Cadet Wing. Senior cadets will develop leadership in underclassmen of the Cadet Air Wing. The senior cadets will do this. The senior cadets will do this. Last one, the senior cadets of the United States Air Force Academy Air Wing will continue to develop good fellowship principles. So fix our eyes upon Jesus. I suggest we become like a cadet at the United States Air Force Academy, and that is every single year of every single that we have on this earth, and every single day of those years, we are good followers of Jesus. And we work every day to increase our acumen at following Jesus, because there's a mission to be accomplished in this world. And that's to win souls. That's to bring people into the family of God, so that they become aliens in this world, but they're family here. And it's in this family that we have hope, and it's in this family that a home is being prepared for us. Out in the world, guess what, folks? When you die, you're just like Rover. You understand? You're just dead all over. But that ain't the case in this family, is it? We have a home, and that's where we're going. Okay? So let's be like this. Let's follow the mission and be good followers. And to do that, we have to keep our eyes fixed on Christ and nothing else. We're born into a living hope. Peter tells us that in verse 3. That we're born again into a living hope, and that is brought about because of the resurrection of Christ from the dead. I'm sure you read that. Muhammad, there's a grave for Muhammad. Whatever else, there's a grave for this person. Whatever, but there's no grave for Christ. That's because He's not there. He's resurrected. He overcame death. All the other folks there of the major religious groups, they couldn't overcome death. They died and they were put in a grave and stayed there. Okay? So our hope is in Jesus Christ and in His resurrection from the dead. And through that we obtain our inheritance, which is imperishable and undefiled, and it does not fade away. It does not fade away. That's getting close to the end. Let's move on down to verses 12 and 13 and through there. I can actually hear the bell in here. I can't hear it in the other classrooms. Peter writes concerning the apostles, the prophets of old, it was revealed to them, because they were prophesying about the coming Christ and they wanted to know about it. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves but you in these things which now have been announced to you through those who preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit that was sent from heaven, things in which angels long to look. Therefore, gird your minds for action. I like verse 3. It's got a lot of action phrases in it. Gird your mind for action. What does that mean, gird your mind? It seems to be a reference to the first Passover meal. What happened on the first Passover meal? Families gathered together in a home. They had a meal to eat, did they not? They had the blood sprinkled over the doorpost. And they took that meal and they waited in that for anticipation of the journey that was to come. The angel of death would pass over them, and then what must they do? Get up and leave. Take the journey. In this world, we are to gird our minds for action. You know, we are to be here. We are to be focused on the journey that is to come. We're not to focus on this world, on this life. We focus for the journey that is to come. That being to, of course, a heavenly reward. So that's where our focus should be. Not on the things of this world. And our focus is to be ready for the return of Christ. You know, we don't know when that's going to be. For some of us, it may be after we've died and our bodies have been placed in a grave. But it's going to happen. He is going to return. For some, we may be alive and on this earth when it happens. And we see it and we experience it. But we gird our minds for action. And that is, gird our minds, prepare ourselves for the return of Christ to this world. Okay, thank you. We'll continue on next week.